Repatriating stolen funds is in our collective interest, President Buhari tells world leaders at United Nations General Assembly.
Involve us all. It is in our collective interest to cooperate in tracking illicit financial flows.
Wife of President at UN General Assembly advocates support for persons living with HIV/AIDS.
Activities marking Nigeria's 58th independence anniversary commence with photo exhibition tracking the footprints of Nigeria's political leaders.
The courage and the will and the resolve to keep trying and to do so at each turn.
And on Good Morning Nigeria today, we shall be looking at Nigeria's participation at the ongoing United Nations General Assembly.
Global leaders press their agendas from perhaps the biggest diplomatic platform in the world, and that is the United Nations General Assembly.
You're right, Karen. Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari took the podium yesterday and got the attention of the world when he addressed the 73rd General Assembly of the United Nations for the 4th time since becoming President of Nigeria.
Yes, indeed, Femi, and it was a rare opportunity for Nigeria to assert its position on global issues. And President Buhari, who was among the early speakers that addressed the UN General Assembly, seized the moment to canvass for peace and sustainable development across the globe.
Of course, the president specifically noted that peace is achievable globally, stressing that the international community must find political solutions to conflicts around the globe, which, he says, cannot be addressed by the force of arms alone.
That's true indeed. And President Buhari also emphasized the need to curtail the proliferation of small arms in Africa, just as he called for international engagements to salvage the Lake Chad Basin and address the root causes of conflicts in the area.
Nigeria, through President Buhari, also used the occasion to remind world leaders that the fight against corruption is for all countries and that it is in their collective interest to find synergy towards tackling illicit financial flows and repatriating stolen funds to their countries of origin.
Yes, the president's address equally centered on the need to protect the rights of migrants worldwide. He particularly commended Western nations who treat migrants, especially African migrants, with dignity and compassion.
Of course, Karen, those are bold and blunt statements by the Nigerian leader to the world, and Nigeria's position at the United Nations General Assembly conformed to this year's theme, which is making the United Nations relevant to all people, global leadership and shared responsibility for peaceful, equitable, and sustainable development.
And we have a number of diplomats on the program today who will do a critical analysis of President Buhari's address and Nigeria's participation at the ongoing United Nations General Assembly 2018. I am Kirian Umayo. Welcome to today's edition of Good Morning Nigeria, broadcast live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority.
And I am Femi Okeo, joining Kirian to welcome you to this edition of Good Morning Nigeria. And as usual, we shall present our companion segments which include a review of today's papers, business, sports, foreign and entertainment news. But first, let's take the morning news from Anne Jibono. Hello, Anne.
Good morning, Femi and Kirian. Good morning, Nigeria. Here's the morning news. President Muhammadu Buhari has made a strong representation to the international community to keep alive the values Nelson Mandela stood for by placing human dignity at the center of their actions. Addressing world leaders at the Nelson Mandela Peace Summit in New York, the president said concerted efforts must also be made towards building a just, peaceful, prosperous, inclusive and fair world.
Passes into history. We stand with him in his aspirations for a better world. It is our duty to live up to his indelible legacy by collectively holding ourselves accountable to the values and principles for this declaration by striving for a just, peaceful, prosperous, democratic, fair, and inclusive world.
And Africa is exploring innovative ways of funding peacekeeping operations on the continent and cutting over-reliance on the United Nations and other donors. This was part of discussions of the African Peace and Security Council held on the sidelines of the 73rd General Assembly of the United Nations.
We talked about our support also for the African fund, security fund that is being set up, and for member states to contribute to that fund to give African countries and the AU the capacity to intervene in conflict and not just wait for outside partners.
Still on reports from the ongoing UN General Assembly, wife of the President, Aisha Muhammadu Buhari, has emphasized the need for spouses of African leaders to take more proactive measures in canvassing support and advocacy to effectively tackle the epidemic of HIV/AIDS and other diseases in Africa towards improving the general well-being of women and children. Mrs. Buhari stated this during the high-level meeting of the African First Ladies Against HIV/AIDS on the sidelines of the 73rd session of the United Nations General Assembly.
Countries need to monitor the activities of the agencies that deals with the HIV and AIDS to make sure that the funds that's given to the countries are being utilized for that purpose alone, and also we should have sense of accountability, because like some of the donors are losing hope on agencies and it's becoming a major problem.
Now back in Nigeria, Vice President Yemi Osinbajo says the present administration will not play down the role of the nation's past leaders in its response to build a prosperous nation. Professor Yemi Osinbajo stated this while declaring a photo exhibition open as part of activities lined up to commemorate Nigeria's 58th independence in Abuja.
We clearly saw the strength of the Nigerian resolve to build a nation and the valiant attempts of the leadership at state building. We've not always excelled. We've not always done as well as we could. But that is not the story. The story is that we have never lacked the courage and the will and the resolve to keep trying, and to do so at each turn with even greater resolve and greater commitment.
A coalition of civil society organizations on sustainable development is throwing its weight behind the call on the National Assembly to fast-track the passage of the National Water Resources Bill for the pending benefits to manifest. It was at a round table in Abuja on the bill before the National Assembly.
How do you talk about people's well-being when they have no water? How do you talk about industrialization where there's no water? How do you talk about good educational system when our girls and boys are still defecating in the nature?
Well, let's talk politics. The All Progressives Congress has released the mode of primaries for the September 29th governorship primary elections. The governorship primary election is scheduled to hold this Saturday across the country and will be conducted using either direct or indirect method as adopted at the last INEC meeting of the party. The National Working Committee of the party has approved the conduct of direct primaries in 17 states and the FCT, while the indirect method will be adopted in 19 states. The National Working Committee, however, banned the Adamawa State Working Committee from participating as delegates during the forthcoming governorship primaries in the state, where indirect primary will be conducted. The missions of the European Union, the United Kingdom and the United States have commended the people of Osun State, the Independent National Electoral Commission, as well as security agencies for the transparent and smooth conduct of the governorship elections held in the state. A statement from the Information Office of the Embassy of the United States stressed the importance of conducting the rerun election without any violence, intimidation or vote buying. The missions advised that whoever wins the election after Thursday's rerun should be magnanimous in victory, and whoever loses should be gracious in defeat. Well, that's the news highlights for now. Good Morning Nigeria continues with Kirian and Femi after this break.
Unemployment, notably youth unemployment, features strongly in our party's manifesto. We intend to attack the problem promptly through revival of agriculture.
The 30K is going a long way. Actually, I bought an acre of land for 60K like 2012, and presently I have a cassava farm and a yam farm.
Reorganized, trained, and fully equipped, we are the new improved Nigeria Police Force. We fight crime, we bust syndicates. Whatever the crime, wherever the hideout, the Nigeria Police Force will get you busted. Stop kidnapping, armed robbery, murder, pipeline vandalism, and other criminal activities. Be productive. Be security conscious. Join the police force to secure your life and property. This message is from the Nigeria Police Force Public Relations Department.
Kehinde suffers from indigestion. His twin Taiyi suffers from heartburn. Sometimes it's the other way around, or both. That's why they use Gaviscon Double Action. It soothes within 3 minutes and lasts for up to 4 hours. For double relief from heartburn and indigestion, Gaviscon Double Action
makes a Nigerian mom powerful.
I trust the power of Dettol's 1 capful for bathing. The power of Dettol's 1 capful protects from up to 100 illness-causing germs.
Be 100% sure.
Hate speech is not a joke. It incites genocide and crimes against humanity. Most of Africa's civil wars are caused by hate speech from one tribe against another. We don't want it here. The Nigerian government stands firm against hate speech.
Under no conditions whatsoever should we tolerate or excuse or justify hate speech or hateful conduct of any kind, especially where such is illegal.
There's no doubt that the resurgent push for separatism, as well as the rising cases of ethnic and religious disharmony, are all traceable to the growing phenomenon of hate speech.
One nation bound in freedom, peace and unity.
Nigeria, one nation one people.
This is a public service announcement brought to you by NTA.
These days, people get their news and information from more media sources than ever before. Some of the news and information given are fake, unverified, doctored, and manufactured to create confusion, stir disaffection, and cause disunity. Before you believe or share any news, ask yourself, is this real? Is it from a credible source? Is it verified or verifiable? Fake news is dangerous. Whether you do it for fun or for political gains, real people can get hurt. Fake news, don't create it, don't spread it.
This is a public service announcement from NTA.
And if you just tuned in, you are in good company with Good Morning Nigeria for today. Now let's turn to business matters. The Central Bank of Nigeria says banks in the country are financially strong and viable as it clears the air on issues surrounding the defunct Sky Bank. Plus, Monetary Policy Committee retains all key parameters. Details of these and more on Business News with Kunle Adeyeye.
Amidst speculations from different segments of the country for a review of the monetary rates, the Monetary Policy Committee has retained all key parameters as held in the last 2 years. It retained the monetary policy rate at 14%, cash reserve ratio at 22.5%, and asymmetric corridor at plus 200 and minus 500 basis points around the monetary policy rate. The liquidity ratio was also retained at 30%. Governor of the Central Bank, Godwin Emefiele, who announced the resolution of MPC, says the decision to hold the existing rates comes from the need to consolidate on the economic gains.
A decision to hold all policy parameters constant would sustain gradual improvements in output growth. There is need to maintain the current monetary policy stance and await a clearer understanding of the quantum and timing of liquidity injections into the economy before deciding on possible adjustments.
The committee also expressed concern over the rising levels of non-performing loans linked to the oil sector, which it cautioned is price-induced and must be checked. It called on the federal government to, as a matter of urgency, rebuild fiscal buffers, strengthen government finances, and intensify the implementation of the ERGP to stimulate economic activities. The committee assured of a positive outlook for the third quarter of 2018. The CBN governor also seized the opportunity to clear the air on the defunct Sky Bank.
The name had to be changed for legal reasons. Haven't gotten to a point where the Central Bank of Nigeria and government has invested close to 800 billion in this bank. At some point, it must be seen to be owned by the CBN until we find investors that can pay a fair value, a fair price for this enterprise.
And equities market closed Tuesday on a positive note as Nigeria Stock Exchange All Share Index appreciated by plus 2.08% to close at 33,114.44 basis points as against minus 0.31% depreciation recorded previously, with its year-to-date returns currently at minus 13.41%.
Thank you, Kunle Adeyeye, for that business package. And up next is newspaper review.
All right, now, Bayo Toyebi, newspaper reviewer, is here this morning. Just as always, Bayo, good morning, and welcome to the program.
Thank you, Kiriam. Good morning. Good morning, Femi. Yeah. Good morning, Nigeria.
Yeah, we have some newspapers here this morning, about 4 of them, and there are stories trending. We have stories covering all aspects of our life, and it's important to note that minimum wage has, of course, been brought into the front burner for a while now, and some newspapers are carrying a story on the planned strike for today. But let's begin with Nigerian pilot here, and go to the main headline of the Nigerian pilot. Femi, is there another paper on that headline
that talks about minimum wage?
Not as headline.
Not as headline.
All right. Yeah. Now, minimum wage on the Nigerian pilot. It says TUC, NLC talk tough, declare nationwide strike. Say actions begin 12 midday today. Commence immediate mobilization of members. Call on Nigerians to stockpile food items. That's on page 4.
And so, of course, the Punch has it too, but it's up there on top of the nameplate. Minimum wage, NLC tells workers to begin strike Thursday. And so, while we're talking about economic matters, something mixed with politics, we go to Daily Trust, and on below the nameplate, we have election spending driving up inflation. That's coming from the Monetary Policy Committee. After these stories, I think other ones are majorly political stories. Should we take Bayo to make his comment on that?
Well, the Labour debacle, if you remember, on the 12th of this month, Labour gave 14-day ultimatum that something has to be done about the minimum wage. The minimum wage thing has been going on. It is involving, incidentally too, the Labour itself. It's a tripartite committee involving Labour, government, and the employment of Labour, including the private sector. However, the stalemate occurred because Labour is reacting on allegation that the minister has said the tripartite committee meeting has adjourned sine die indefinitely. And that's why they are putting pressure. Labour had targeted that by the end of, in fact, August, there should have been a minimum wage, and they were patient enough to wait up to September. On the other hand, the Minister of Labour and Employment is saying that the Labour is blackmailing him. Actually, Labour is part of the tripartite committee, and the tripartite committee has submitted its report to Federal Executive Council. They are waiting for the input of the National Economic Council so that they will now announce a minimum wage. But Labour's patience is wearing thin. Meanwhile, Labour initially proposed 56,000 as the new minimum wage. They later on increased it to 65.
Okay.
As at the last count, Labour is said to have come down to about 45. The National Economic Council, which involves organized private sector, are proposing about 45,000. So between 18,000 and 45,000, and the Vice President has been meeting with members of the tripartite committee, particularly the National Economic Council, to see that
but what
something
led to this
is
strike
done.
they are calling now? What was at the last point where they now decided to go on strike? What was the dispute?
Well, it's still that because of the indefinite suspension of the tripartite talk, and particularly that Labour, organized Labour, was directed by the Central Working Committee that if nothing is done about it, they just have to act.
Now, the next area we should be visiting is politics, and it's like the All Progressive Congress have stolen all the major headlines, and it's about the primaries. Daily Trust says APC approves direct primaries for Lagos, Zamfara, Imo, and others. And then the rider, indirect primaries for Adamawa, Rivers, Kaduna, and Borno. And of course, on the front page of the Daily Trust is a breakdown of the contestants for the governorship election in APC. Those are people who are aspiring to be candidates of APC, and it's a very good breakdown on the front page of Daily Trust. I'm sure you have similar stories, but I also have the same story on the front page of The Punch. And The Punch says, governorship tickets, APC approves direct primaries for Lagos, Kano, something similar to what Daily Trust says, but the names on the front page are different. Lagos, Kano, Imo, and others. And then the rider, indirect primaries for Rivers, Kaduna, Benue, Borno, Adamawa, and Kaduna stakeholders, KIK, ruling party set for Saturday's exercise.
All right, before Bayo comes in with analysis on the political topics this morning, let's take on some other stories on politics on the Nigerian pilot, and that's on the foot of the Nigerian pilot. Atiku meets Omisore in a final offensive to win Oshu polls. Now, cholera pilot, yes, the Nigerian pilot. Cholera kills 97 persons in Yobe. And then we have a shake-up in FCTA as minister drops mandate secretaries. INEC clears the air on purported staff that tore Ayeda Day's report sheet. And on Independence Day 2018, Nigeria's history will not determine its future, says the Vice President, Professor Shebajo. And now, below the nameplate of the Nigerian pilots, we have APC global aspirants insist on direct primaries on page 16. And we have court nullifies removal of Imo deputy governor. Bayo.
Well, let's talk about the politics first. You recall that at the last meeting of the All Progressive Congress, it was announced that for the presidential primaries, it is going to be direct primaries. But for the state and other ones, the discretion was left to the state to decide whether to be direct primaries or indirect. And everybody is picking as they want to choose, depending upon the determination by the various states. And certainly, there will be fallout, and because internal democracy has been the challenge of all political parties, and that's why you have people jumping ship. But meanwhile, the latest bride in town is the SDP gubernatorial candidate of Osun elections. And this is not far-fetched, because already Dr. Bukola Saraki has visited him. Governor Ayodele Fayose has also visited him. On the side of the APC, he has also been visited by Lasso and also the governor-in-waiting in the Ekiti State, Dr. Kayode Fayemi. And it is all not far-fetched, because in the last election, Senator Omisore returned third with 128,049 votes to place third. The election is inconclusive, and the 7 polling units where elections are to be determined, 2 of them are in Ife North and Ife South, which is his constituency, and it carries about 1,667 votes. The other one, which is of significance, is Oshogbo, which has 884. But the third one is Orolu, and Orolu, in fact, has 3 local governments where there was such default that is leading to the supplementary election, and he is controlling 947 votes. So, and that is the constituency of the Deputy Speaker, Lasso Yusuf. And so Lasso Yusuf, too, has been visiting Omishore, and there's pressure that...
Now, let's return to the primaries of APC.
Yes.
The direct primaries sounds like the most inclusive, according to people's analysis, the most inclusive that it involves all party members. But then it needs real management because of the crowd that will be there.
It's simple.
Yes.
Direct primaries means every card-carrying member will come and vote in the state. You can imagine how cumbersome that will be. Indirect primaries means representative of everybody, delegates, will come and vote. But the fear there is that delegates can be bought over. Monetization of the political system. So there's this mutual suspicion between everybody. The other alternative is a consensus where everybody agrees that, okay, we agree this is the candidate. And this time, consensus are few and far fetched in between.
Okay.
All right. You still have more stories there?
Yeah, I have the story on which is a little common to other papers. Leah Sharibu's mother suing the federal government for 500 million naira damages in the Punch. But we also have it in Daily Trust too, at the foot of Daily Trust. On this, it is on the right side of Punch. Then we have other stories on the Punch. We have talked about the minimum wage, but this time the Punch talks about Buhari seeks expansion of UN Security Council and others. Then we go to matters of economy. The economy may slip back into recession, CBN warns. Those are fallout from the money, also from the Punch. On the top right corner of the Punch, after the Buhari story, then below it we have economy may slip back into recession, and that is coming from the CBN. I think it's a timely warning, particularly for our economic policies, to make sure that we stem that in the board.
Yes, before Bayo comes in now, let's go to the Daily Sun newspaper. Daily Sun newspaper is just on the right-hand side of the nameplate of the Daily Sun. Buhari seeks global help to fight corruption at the UN. With the rider EU, US, UK won against intimidation in Osun rerun election. The stories are on page 3 and 421 of the Daily Sun. And then the headline there, major headline says the DSS arrests Aisha Buhari's ADC. With the rider, president's wife disowns security aid over 2.5 billion extortion mess. And then the photograph we will see on the front page of the Daily Sun about victims of flood disaster in Makoja, Ojokolo, and the Chala communities in a Daha local government area of Kogi State during verification of internally displaced persons. That's, of course, the ripples of the recent flooding in many parts of the country. And then below that we have Abdul Salami panel never persuaded Jonathan to concede defeat Coca Center. With the rider Peace Committee meets INEC on 2019 polls on page 11. Aviation Minister Lai Mohammed feud over Nigeria Air. Disagree on reasons for project suspension. That's on page 6. Economy may slip back to recession, CBN warns. Workers said to begin nationwide strike. Pages 2 and 3 have the story on the Daily Sun. Bayo.
Yes, Rebecca Sherebu, the mother of the schoolgirl that was adopted and retained from Dapchi, has reportedly sued. Actually, it was an NGO by name Lift Up, an NGO from United States that sued in her stead. And they have sued the Inspector General of Police and the Attorney General of Federation. First of all, that they should secure the immediate release and unconditional release of her daughter. And secondly, pay her compensation of 500 million for the reelection of duty for securing the release of her daughter. This information was released in Jos. The other interesting story is that...
Before you go to another interesting story,
yes.
What do you make of that kind of move now by an NGO on behalf of the family of Leah? So does it really make sense? I mean, let us understand why they're suing in the first place.
And again, the courts hardly delve into situations where their orders are like futile. The orders the court will give are they cannot be executed. Possibly, that's my thinking. I can imagine a court ordering government to secure the release of Leah Sharibu. I don't know how particularly, but the compensation area, yes, exactly. Thank you. The compensation area possibly is an area that is.
But the government has also said that it's still working towards getting her release, right? So it's not as if government has, dropped the idea of negotiating for her release. So one wonders why this still.
The anxiety is there, but for me, my pity goes to the family. If you recall, just about 10 days ago, the father suffered theft. They stole his generator, and sometimes when you are in agony, they come in torrents. My prayer is that she should be released very soon, and her blessings too will come in torrents. But meanwhile, it has happened in Imo State. The deputy governor, Eze Madumere, has been directed by the court to be reinstated as deputy governor. This is because the court, presided over by Justice Benjamin Iheaka, declared that the impeachment is invalid and of no legal consequence. You recall that something like that happened in Enugu, where a deputy governor was impeached for operating a poultry and a piggery in government house?
No, but it's not.
And eventually it was overturned.
It's not the first time that politicians are going into exercise that cannot be backed up by law. And the process of impeachment are very clearly spelled out. And yet we still go we
Yeah.
still go into a
They
wild
are-
goose chase, kind of.
I think they are being scared of the fact that it is a rigorous process, but you have to, go conclude it
It's
before you can
attainable,
now-
it has been done before, and it can be done. I mean, Now let's go into the editorials, and it comes from Daily Telegraph. They're writing about sustainability of school feeding program. That's the focus of the editorial of Daily Telegraph. And the Daily Telegraph is looking at the possibility of the school feeding program of this present administration being sustainable and achieving the motives for which it was set out to. One of the catches of that write-up is, as a matter of exigency and without much ado, every state in the Federation should leverage on this far-reaching program to boost pupils' enrollment and retention in their schools. And that is just the summary of what this editorial is trying to achieve.
Well, the school feeding program is part of the federal government's program to bring education closer to the grassroots, right from the grassroots, because when the child is fed at school, one of the challenges of the parents about food is taken off. And even in some states, the state governments have gone to the extent of even providing some uniform and furniture in the school so that making the access to education a lot more convenient. But this concern is that about 10.5 million by United Nations standards are out of school. And so far, with the school feeding program, it has covered about 24 states and about 8,596,340 people have been affected by it. But the challenge is that the editorial is saying that it should be extended to all the 36 states of the Federation and the FCT so that it will cover the ground. That will make government's initiative towards education comprehensive. You know, even at the secondary school level, with the unity schools, there is a fixed tuition to make it affordable. And at the university level, tuition is free. However, there are some challenges that are coming. For instance, Ebonyi State has a state university, and where a student has gotten admission to read medicine, and because the university has a policy that they don't want their students to stay off campus, for the first year student to read medicine, he has to cough out 1 million. That is taking education out of the reach of the children, particularly if you look at Ebonyi State in the context of the Southeast Nigeria, educational-wise. So these are some of the obstacles that should be removed from the path to education.
On the aspect of a school feeding program, I've had the privilege of covering 1 or 2 assignments on that project. I think part of the problem is that some state governments, were not willing to contribute their own quota in the entire exercise. But gradually, many states are buying into it because we understood then that the federal government will provide the funds, while the states will provide the logistics, and of course even bring the contractors that will be engaged to carry out the exercise. But now, from all indications, if they can get up to 28 states, it does mean that many states are beginning to buy into it.
It was slow in starting because they had to be sure of the system, engage the caterers, make sure that the food quality is good and ascertain. And it has a ripple effect. You will now have people who will be engaged, who will be paid for cooking the food. Farmers whose eggs are wanting a market will now have a market because a child will have an egg a day. So it had its own ripple effect, but it requires management.
Thank you very much, Bayo, for your normal daily reviews. And now when we return from this break, we'll go to our discussion on the 73rd General Assembly and Nigeria's participation.
Fake news which is shared for malicious purposes is a danger to our peace and security in Nigeria. Misinformation as fake news is a serious threat to our hard-earned democracy and promotes hatred and misunderstanding between our communities. We are all responsible for stopping the spread of fake news in its tracks. So, always check the source and credibility of any news item. Say no to fake news. This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information.
For years, the NTA has been promoting science, technology, arts and crafts under the tagged name National Children's Expo. We are set with another edition as we gather children around Nigeria, junior category ages 6 to 12 and senior category ages 13 to 18. The theme for Expo 2018, achieving self-sufficiency in agriculture, meeting the challenges of security and exposition of alternative energy as pathways to national development. Date, October 21st to 25th, 2018. Venue, NTA Headquarters Arena, Area 11, Garki, Abuja. We are set to celebrate the best of innovation across the country. For more information, please call the following numbers. NTA ETV, promoting learning.
Madam. Brought us as usual.
As usual.
You
have no problem.
For the three
You are welcome, sir.
As usual, yeah?
Welcome. You take that one.
Yeah.
Take that one.
You
don't understand? We want Nigerian homegrown rice. Finish. You don't have? You don't have?
Join the rice revolution today.
No other rice that tastes like Nigerian rice. Are you sorry? That's the Nigerian rice we are talking about. Chocolate made in Nigerian rice. Healthy food. I'm going to bring Mrs. Mobu to come to chocolate rice made in Nigeria here. And see how it are made.
Correct.
And how they are cooked.
Correct.
Homegrown rice are good for your health. It boosts our economy and give employment to our people.
This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
The 73rd General Assembly of the United Nations is our focus on Good Morning Nigeria. And of course, we will analyze the highlights of President Muhammadu Buhari's address to the UN. And to set the tone for our conversation, let's take this background report put together by our correspondent Ademu Sambo.
Making the United Nations relevant to all people, global leadership and shared responsibilities for peaceful, equitable and sustainable societies is the focus of this year's General Assembly. It is therefore an opportunity for the world leaders to give their countries perspectives towards achieving their objectives and making the world a better place for all of humanity. For President Muhammadu Buhari, resolving international conflicts, crises and wars, defeating terrorism and insurgency, curbing arms trafficking, fighting corruption and other global challenges can only be effective through concerted action and multilateral cooperation.
Corruption within countries and illicit flow of funds across national boundaries have huge negative impact on the stability, peace and economic prospect of millions in developing countries. Corruption significantly drives national governments of resources to provide meaningful livelihoods to their populations who are predominantly youth, thus giving rise to more irregular migration. The fight against corruption, therefore, involves us all.
The president described as regrettable that many of the crises and threats to peace and security around the world remain unresolved, and in some cases, matters got worse. He said although the crises have a variety of festering causes and effects, it is the failure to address them early and effectively that leads to out-of-control conflicts.
International community cannot afford to give up on the Syrian and Yemeni people. We must pursue all efforts to find peaceful, negotiated political solutions to these wars, which cannot be won by force of arms alone. We support the United Nations efforts in ensuring that the Rohingya refugees are allowed to return to their homes in Myanmar with security, protection, and guarantee of citizenship.
President Buhari once again made a case for rededicated international engagement towards accelerating the recovery efforts in the Lake Chad Basin. This, he said, will go a long way towards minimizing economic competition between farmers and herders, as well as irregular migration to Europe. He also called for a speedy reform of the United Nations Security Council with expanded membership in both the permanent and non-permanent categories.
It is high time we stop skirting around the issue and establish achievable benchmarks and time frames for these reforms. I assure you all that in this advocacy, I am only reflecting Nigeria's deep and abiding commitment to our organization and its founding principles and goals.
The president takes pride in the remarkable contribution of Nigeria to peacekeeping operations around the world, as well as mobilizing the required human and material resources towards achieving other set goals of the United Nations for Sustainable Development.
We, in the spirit of international solidarity, will readily cooperate with other nations seeking to achieve similar goals for their own populations to help ensure that no one is left behind. I thank you very much for your attention.
Now joining us here in the studio to discuss the thrust of President Muhammadu Buhari's speech and matters arising at the ongoing 73rd UN General Assembly is Ambassador Usman Sariki, former Deputy Permanent Representative of Nigeria to the United Nations. Ambassador, you're welcome to Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you. Thank you.
We also have in our studio another diplomat and someone you're very used to on this program particularly. He is the former minister, former permanent secretary, I beg your pardon, former permanent secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Joe Keshi. Thanks for joining us on the program.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Well, we'll also be joined from our Lagos Network Center by a senior research fellow and head of the Division of Security and Strategic Studies of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, NIAA, Dr. Joseph Bolarinwa. Dr. Bolarinwa, welcome to Good Morning Nigeria. Well, we hope you can hear us very clearly. And let's go over to the U.S. via Skype from New York, the host city of the 73rd United Nations General Assembly. And he's a special advisor to the President on Media and Publicity, Femi Adesina, who will be joining us for this morning's conversation. You are welcome to the program, Mr. Adesina. Line is through to New York for Mr. Adesina to talk to us this morning on this very, very important topic. He's on ground in New York, as a matter of fact. So he attended the General Assembly and, of course, watched the president make his speech yesterday. And that's why we're asking him. Good morning once again, Mr. Femi Adesina. Welcome to the program. It seems that our audio is not through yet, and our engineers, I'm sure, are working on that. But when we're able to establish a contact with him, we'll return to New York for his own contribution to this program. For now, let's first of all ask Ambassador Keshi to lead us into this conversation by making an assessment of President Buhari's speech yesterday.
Well, I think the president, in my view, did very well in highlighting some of the issues around the world and the challenges that the world faces. What I particularly liked is one of the lines where he said that, look, all the issues that we discussed last year have actually gone worse. Some of the global issues have actually gone worse, and he took his time to, enumerate some of them. So you begin to wonder, given the theme of this year's, meeting, whether we are making progress if all the issues that were discussed last year has actually gone worse. And you can actually begin to take all the issues one by one and see how bad they've become over the last 1 year. If you take like the Palestinian issue that he raised, or the issue of the crisis in Myanmar, the Palestinian issue, even though he reaffirmed our commitment to the UN Security Council resolution and the rest of it, there's a growing thought that the conditions, the fundamentals for two states, for example, in the Middle East, is beginning to disappear. So the United Nations itself and the global leaders must begin to think creatively on how to either pressurize Israel for this to happen before they completely obliterate any fundamentals to create a two-state solution. But by and large, I just think that the president highlighted quite a number of these international issues. On another platform before this, where I was asked what was I expecting of the president, I said, well, I hope, given the nature of the United Nations, that it offers a platform for world leaders to talk about their own country and what they are doing. I'd expected that when you look at, in the last couple of months, there have been a number of institutional reports coming out from a number of world organizations about the future of Nigeria and a number of things. I thought it was an opportunity for the president to reassure the world that, look, we're doing reasonably well. Our coming election will be, free and fair. But just give that commitment, because at the end of the day, it gives you opportunity to talk to the world. If you cannot be looking for investors if investors do not have confidence in your peace and security in your country. So, by and large, I think for me, this was just the only drawback. But on the whole, he touched on virtually all the crises in the world.
Now let's take his initial thoughts too, as we set the stage for deeper discussion on this program from Ambassador Usman Seriki. Give us your panoramic view of President Muhammadu Buhari's speech at this year's UN General Assembly.
Thank you very much. I concur with my boss, the former Permanent Secretary, that His Excellency, Mr. President, actually articulated the concerns, aspirations, and hopes of Nigerians. And also, let's not forget of West Africa as chairman of ECOWAS, in terms of conveying the need for Africa to be centrally located in global peace initiatives. It is very important for us to recall the theme of this year's General Assembly, which is making the United Nations relevant to all people. And then global leadership, and also peace and sustainable societies. So within that ambit, he highlighted the concerns of Nigeria, of West Africa, and the world in terms of this incessant continuation of conflicts. And that actually goes against the grain of the theme of the General Assembly itself. Secondly, the president's speech indicated or gave the signal to the world that Nigeria mattered. Whenever we spoke, the world should listen and take heed of what we said, and also to learn some lessons from our peaceful posture concerning global issues. What actually the president's speech revealed was the unsolved issues that are growing in dimension. And here, you have to hold the United Nations Security Council responsible, because anything dealing with global or international maintenance of international peace and security devolves on the Security Council. The 5 permanent members, when you look at the configuration and typology of wars and conflicts all over the world, you find the footprints or the fingers of some of the 5 permanent members involved. Either they block the path to peace through the use of the veto, or they sponsor and support factions. Take Syria, for instance. The entire members of the 5, apart from China, the rest of the remaining 4 permanent members are deeply involved in the conflict in Syria. And when you come to Yemen and Libya, you find some of those members are also involved. So they make the problems of the world intractable because of the pursuit of their individual national interests. And that is where the gravest problem lies. Member states should allow the United Nations as a global governance body to balance between individual national interests and the global interests, global challenges, and global concerns, so that the UN can find viable, lasting solutions to global challenges.
So I think that is where I think Mr. President's speech becomes very relevant.
All right, thank you. Let's go over to Lagos, where we have Dr. Joseph Bolarinwa. Dr. Bolarinwa, let's get your own take on President's presentation yesterday. Let's understand what you believe was the high point of his speech yesterday.
President did very well by representing the country and presenting the country to the global community in a very stimulating way. He highlighted a lot of issues affecting us at the level of the country, Nigeria, at the regional level, at the level of ECOWAS, and at the global level. He particularly emphasized on the need for more collaborative efforts in fighting terrorism and insurgencies all over the world. And he was also able to highlight further how Nigeria has achieved in fighting the Boko Haram insurgency in Nigeria. So he also tried to increase and mobilize support for international efforts in fighting terrorism. He was able to also emphasize the issue of the Rohingya refugees in Myanmar and the need for the United Nations security to improve their efforts in trying to resolve this crisis. And these Rohingya people are returned safely back to their roots. He further stated in the area of corruption that corruption really has affected most developing countries around the world, and that Nigeria is not an exception. He stated that there is need for further international collaboration in fighting corruption, particularly in tracing these proceeds, illicit transfer of funds, illicit movements of funds from these developing nations. They are affecting the development of those countries. Nigeria is also affected by this. Nigeria is affected by a lot of this, and poverty has really increased around the world due to corruption. So there is need for international efforts, collaborative efforts to stem and stop corruption around the globe. And we need the help of these developed countries, particularly the big members or the permanent members of the United Nations. Beyond this, President Buhari emphasized more on the need to improve global peace and security, which is actually the major aim, objective of establishing the United Nations. If you look at the charter, at the preamble of the Charter of the United Nations, you will see that this organization is established, among other things, to maintain world peace and security. So President Buhari tried to emphasize this and the need for the United Nations, especially the Security Council, to be more proactive in maintaining world peace, global peace, and stability. And by this, there will be economic growth and development. President Buhari also tried to emphasize the need for collaborative efforts in trying to reform the United Nations. Of course, reforming the United Nations have been on the global burner and the agenda of the United Nations for more than a decade now. But every time they will discuss and throw it away, they will discuss and rest the discussions. But President Buhari emphasized the need to quickly bring to a conclusive end on this need for reforms of the United Nations, particularly the Security Council. So President Buhari talks more about expanding the Security Council, the membership of the Security Council, both on the side of the permanent membership and that of the non-permanent membership, that there's need to expand it. And of course, everyone knows that Nigeria has always been agitating to be a permanent member of the Security Council if it is finally reformed. Of course, there is also South Africa and Egypt also trying to get that from Africa. But if the Security Council is expanded, if the Security Council is strengthened, and Nigeria becomes a member, then there will be a more proactive United Nations, especially that of the Security Council. So we hope all of this, if the United Nations can take proactively and seriously, there will be progress in the world, there will be progress in Nigeria, there will be progress at the ECOWAS level. Of course, President Muhammadu Buhari is currently the chairman of ECOWAS, and the whole ECOWAS members, or ECOWAS as an organization, they are looking up to Nigeria in a lot of ways, and Nigeria has been up to that standard. So President Buhari has really highlighted the major issues affecting Nigeria, the effort Nigeria has made in fighting the Boko Haram insurgency, and the need for international collaborative efforts in trying to stem corruption, in stemming insurgency and terrorism all over the world. We hope all of this will be taken seriously by the United Nations itself.
All right, Bolarinwa, thank you indeed. We will return to you in the course of this conversation. Now, we have been able to re-establish contact with Femi Adesina in New York. And Femi, good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Nigeria. Good morning, Syrians. Good morning, Ambassador. And every other contributor to the program. I say good morning.
From you. All right, let's begin by asking you, what is the perception of the diplomatic community about President Buhari's presentation yesterday at the floor of the United Nations General Assembly?
Well, we can design that from the way the address was received. It was well received. The applause, the language of those listening to him was good, and the comments thereafter were also good. I've also taken time to follow comments and opinions, both on traditional media and the social media. I think by and large, there was a lot of satisfaction with the speech, with the tenor of the speech, with the presentation itself, and I think so far so good.
Additional, one language, one word he used, or two words he used, that may summarize the position that the world is now, is that he said quite a number of things that should be done successfully at the UN are shared responsibilities. He used the word shared responsibilities. Now, how much of the feedback of that speech have you seen that accepts that the world agrees that they are supposed to be a joint, a synergy in achieving all the areas he itemized?
Well, you also notice that in the speech of other world leaders, that trend seems to run through it. And that is telling us that it's almost a consensus among world leaders that these things they come to discuss year after year can only be achieved if everyone plays his part. There is shared responsibility. The president spoke about not much progress being made on certain matters. And that is already telling us that if the desired progress will be made, then each part must play its role. The country involved, the personnel involved, and the international community through the United Nations. So it's a consensus that shared responsibility will take the world to get to.
All right, just before you go, well, by calling for expanded membership of the United Nations Security Council for both permanent members and non-permanent members, what do you think that Nigeria is aiming at by raising this very critical issue at this stage in the life of United Nations as an organization?
If you recall, the fourth founding of the President of the United Nations started from August 20, 1772 to the 17th. And every year, except one, he always made up. And not only a lot of leaders. So it's a major issue.
Well, Mr. Adesina, we are beginning to have distortions along your audio line, and we are back to Abuja. We hope that before the program is concluded, that we'll have a clear signal once again to link you up there in New York. But so far, thank you for your contribution, and we hope to return to you much later. Femi.
Yes, now back to the studio, Ambassador Joe Keshi. Let's take on that area you really kicked out with, which is in saying that, for instance, we really have not moved forward in some particular area. And let's use that to link up with what I spoke to Mr. Adeshina about, that we have not done so much in the areas we itemized in previous years, shows possibly that the world should come together. But you will discover, without the president necessarily naming any country, but you will discover that, for instance, the US is going solo. Some people are beginning to advocate pulling back and dealing with their problems first. How is that pulling us back in terms of this shared responsibility and in terms of moving forward for the world?
Well, the best way to answer your question is to remind us all that the international system that was created after the World War in 1945 or something like that, today is under threat, not just by the Trump forces, but by all other, challenges facing the world. If you take, for example, the issue of migration and compare modern migration to the migrations that took place in the 60s and the 70s, you find out that the world was more receptive of the migration in the past than it is today. And that itself is posing problem. When you see a country like Italy, for example, behaving in a very cruel manner to immigrants, even expressing that it doesn't give a damn if they all perish on the high sea or they should be turned back to wherever they can, you begin to get a sense in what has happened to the world over the last couple of years. But you were right. There is this threat about shared responsibility. If you listen to Donald Trump yesterday, I was listening to him. My first reaction is that this man is sounding like a third world leader when he should be projecting America as the leader of the world, as we've gotten to know, over the years. To the extent that he even complained that they would only respond to those who, respond to them. And when you think of that speech itself, what are we going to give the United States to start with? We can't, except China loans them money. The rest of us can't loan them money. But when a guy with so much goes on to the platform of the United Nations and begin to grumble and begin to whine, then you begin to see that the international system itself is losing that touch of understanding that we need to share these things. We need to help others. We need to pull them out. Because after all, it was the United States itself that pulled Europe after the Second World War, through the Marshall Plan that Europe, became a developed nation. So it's the major problem. At the end of the day, what I would again end by saying is that, look, we in this part of the world, we need to begin to listen to the vibes coming from the rest of the world. Whether some people like to admit it or not, Africa is gradually being abandoned by the rest of the world, because they think that they've done so much and we have since refused to grow. So when you find the president saying they are taking a serious look at development aid, and they only give those who are friendly to us, or those who, more or less, those who like us, or those who listen to what we say, or those who accept our dictation, it's not the only one who said something like that. It's sending a message to people like us in this country that we need to grow up, so that we act like a man somewhere along the line. Not someday somebody comes to us and say, you either take this or nothing. That's where I'll end.
Okay, thank you, Dee. Let's turn to Ambassador Usman Sarki. Along the same line of what Ambassador Keshi has just said, with respect to shared responsibility. If you listen to Trump yesterday, his deglobalization policy was amplified by some examples he gave yesterday. America gives aid to so many countries. Some of those aids were are actually stolen by government functionaries of such countries, and so the money is returned to America and starting some banks. He was worried, actually, that if you are giving aids and you do not even put the aids into proper utilization, that America is not prepared, to continue giving you aids. And besides, people say that where you put your money is where you put your mouth. And if somebody gives you money and doesn't get anything from you, somehow he reacts. The world is beginning to change according to the thoughts of Donald Trump and other speakers, according to what Ambassador Kechi told us here. Now, in your perspective, what should be the message from this statement of Donald Trump? What should be the message to African leaders, especially?
Yes. Well, first to Nigeria, what will be the message to Nigeria? I think the message is let us get up from our slumber, wake up, girdle our lions, and face the world squarely on our own terms. Let us fight corruption first in this country. Maximize our resources, direct them to places, areas where they will make impact. We can never move even an inch forward developmentally if we don't fight corruption in this country. Corruption at the local government level, corruption at the state level, at the federal level. This is the bane of this country. If Nigeria is not pulled out of the quagmire, the rest of Africa, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, will not go anywhere. This is a fact acknowledged by other Africans. Let us not be so much carried away or be so much disturbed by what President Trump said. He was speaking to the gallery. That is his national constituency. The midterm election is coming, I think, in November. He is having a very badly disarrayed White House governance there. So he's trying to actually rally around the extreme right, the people who voted him into office, to tell them, I'm still here and I matter and I care for you. Let us not be disconcerted or to feel disconsolate about his speech. The other side of the speech, which did not come out, was the American government announced the establishment of a $60 billion package for developing countries by way of infusion of investment through the private sector and other agencies to compete with what China is doing. Yeah. So on one hand, he comes to the United Nations to say, you are either with us or not. And on the other hand, you find the technocrats who know and who realize the impact of the Trump policy saying, look, we have to engage with the world. We are not an island unto ourselves. So they put up this package of $60 billion. But that is just a drop in the ocean. Now, coming back to the issue of shared responsibility. Shared responsibility has been a consistent theme of the United Nations from its foundation up till today. And it is part of the theme of this year's General Assembly. First, it says global leadership, shared responsibility, peace, and sustainable societies. All these principles are being undermined by nationalism, especially nationalism of the extreme type. Ambassador, my boss has referred to Italy. I can refer to Hungary. I can refer to Sweden, where a party, extreme right party, has come to power. Sometime you find in Austria, extreme right-wing parties coming up. And they are posing a threat to issue of collective security, multilateralism, and shared responsibility. Africa should resist going down that trend. We should not be too nationalistic in terms of corralling ourselves, fencing ourselves up and presenting our back to the world, bristling with weapons and offensive languages and frowning faces. We should be welcoming, like Ambassador says, for investments, friendly investments, friendly capital flowing in, and to interdict the flow of capital out of our continent. This is the most important thing. And without the economics of the whole issue, if we don't understand them, we will continue to play a second fiddle. So fighting corruption, structurally establishing precision and organization in governance, and making ourselves relevant. This is ultimately what matters.
Let me come to you in Lagos, Dr. Joseph Bolaniwa. One other area, we have highlighted it, which President Muhammadu Buhari reminded the world of, is in the reform of the United Nations General Assembly and the Security Council, about the expansion and the need to bring others on board. Why has this idea, and this idea has been floating for some years now, why has it become intractable? Why is it? Of course, we know nobody wants to let go what he already has. But is it not becoming more realistic that you bring others on board for the United Nations to get reformed?
Yes, there is need for the expansion of the Security Council of the United Nations. And that's why since 2005, when the report was released by the late former Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Kofi Annan, they have been agitating for the reform of the United Nations, particularly the Security Council. If the Security Council is not expanded, like the two excellencies in the studio I've mentioned earlier, if it's not expanded, it means only 5 powerful nations, or call it permanent members, will continue to dictate the affairs of the world. Of course, most decisions are taken at the level of the General Assembly, but the Security Council must politically approve any decision made by the General Assembly. And that's where the major decisions are made at the level of the Security Council. So there is need to strengthen the United Nations with the expansion of the Security Council, and more permanent members and more non-permanent members are brought on board. By this, the principle of shared responsibility will be enhanced, whereby everybody has his own responsibility to take. Not only that, everybody has his own quota to contribute. Everyone has the burden of the world to share among ourselves. And thereby, we have a safer world. We have a peaceful world. We have a stable world. If this is not done, only 5 permanent members who always act in their own interest alone, like Ambassador Seriki said earlier, they've always acted only in the interest that concerns them. If it doesn't concern them, they will not do anything. Look at the issue of Syria. The Syrian crisis have gone so wide that one cannot just imagine what will happen in the nearest hour, in the few hours, or in the next 1 month or thereabouts. Look at the issue of Myanmar, and look at the plight of the Rohingya refugees. Of course, President Muhammadu Buhari also made allusions to it. And look at the issue of illegal migration. Of course, President Buhari mentioned that it is because of increasing poverty in most developing nations, and particularly the problem and the stigma of corruption, that is also fueling illicit movement of funds and money. It's also fueling illegal migration. Many people are moving out of these countries in Asia, particularly in Africa, and their destination is Europe, especially Italy. Italy, look at Greece. Greece closing its borders, Sweden closing its borders, and people are not. And you look at what is happening, look at the government emerging in Europe now. Most of these governments emerging in Europe now, in Italy, in Sweden, in most places, even in Greece, they don't want anything collective responsibility. And that's what the United Nations is all about. That's what President Buhari was trying to talk about shared responsibility. Let all of us take our own quota. Let all of us do our own contribution. By so doing, we have a safer world. We have a secure world. Everything will be stable. And there, growth and development can take place. Where there is no peace, development cannot take place. But where we have instability, we have insurgencies all over the world, terrorism aggravating and escalating problems of the world, development cannot take place. So we should all do what we are meant to do. So if the United Nations Security Council is not expanded, I'm afraid things will just continue to be the way it has been. Issues that were discussed last year, years back, 2 years ago, they are still what we are repeating again. And that's why we need a safer world. We need a global peace and security. We also need this responsibility of shared values, shared responsibility. And that's why President Buhari is talking about expanding the Security Council and expanding the membership on the non-permanent basis and the permanent basis. If other people are involved, then there will be safer world, there will be more peace. Then other people probably will take up other responsibilities the other 5 have refused to take. Look at the issue of U.S. mentioned by the Excellencies earlier. U.S. is trying to do things to favor herself. China will do the same thing. Russia will do the same thing. Great Britain will do the same thing. France will do the same thing. So what is more permanent is interest. So there's no permanent friend. There's no permanent enemy. But what is permanent in the international system is interest. So everyone goes there to go and protect our interest. And while we are protecting our national interests, we also need to talk about our collective responsibility, what has brought us on board these United Nations, and what we have all agreed to do together. Collective security, collective responsibility, collective growth, collective development. And where there are problems, let us come together with one voice to resolve them. And that's why President Muhammadu Buhari is still talking about the expansion, the reform of the United Nations, especially the Security Council. And if a country like Nigeria is brought on board, we have done so well for Africa. We have done so well for the region, West Africa. We have done so well. And that's why even the chairmanship has come back to Nigeria. President Muhammadu Buhari is currently the chairman of the ECOWAS. And we are doing so well about the security, about the funding, about the stability. Nigeria is even the landlord of ECOWAS. So we are doing so well. Even at the level of the African Union, we have done our own, we are still doing our own, we keep contributing our quota so that Africa will get out of this problem of underdevelopment, problem of terrorism and insurgency, problem of corruption that is affecting our growth and development. We are also trying to look at this, how to stem this illegal migration. Every day, Africans are moving towards the Mediterranean, the ISIS are moving to Europe. And many of them are dying on a daily basis. It's being reported every day. So is this poverty? Is this corruption? Is this all perpetual and perennial crisis we keep having that's making people to run away? If all these problems are resolved, they are stemmed, and the United Nations move up to its own responsibility the way it started in 1945, then we'll have a safer world, we have a secure world, and we have a protected world. And everyone will take his own responsibility. And at the national levels, our countries will do what they are meant to do, and the one they cannot do, the United Nations can come to the aid.
Well said, Dr. Bolarinwa. And let's return to the studio now and go to Ambassador Keshe. Ambassador Keshe, would like you to speak to some of the issues he raised already with respect to expanding United Nations Permanent Security Council. The membership, has been in the front burner for decades now, and no reaction has been taken by the 5 members of this council. Now, what would be the benefit if this expansion is achieved? And are there criteria for one to belong to the permanent membership of the Security Council? Are we talking about the strength of a country in terms of military strength, economic vibrancy, and what have you? Are there prerequisites that could lead to more countries becoming member of the Permanent Security Council at the UN?
Well, let me start by also going back to the question that was posed to the gentleman in Lagos, I'm not too sure if the expansion of the UN is on the agenda of the current Secretary General. But I know it's an issue before the UN, but I'm not sure if it's on the agenda of this new gentleman. But we must not forget one or two things. That for me, the last effort made to expand the Security Council failed, not so much because of the big powers, but because of the dynamics of each continent deciding who represents the continent. In the case of Africa, I mean, it will make natural sense, conventional sense to say that Nigeria must be for so many reasons, and maybe South Africa or Egypt, one of the two, would be a member of the Security Council. But we had a situation where as soon as some decision was made, a number of insignificant, with all due respect, started indicating that they want to also be a member of the Security Council. I can't remember, you correct me, I don't know whether Gambia was one of those who at some point in time decided that they want also to be a member of the Security Council. Libya also came on board that it wants to be. Look, so we just made a nuisance of the whole thing, so it became difficult to agree. But we are not the only one with that problem. In other continents also, I can't remember what happened to the Japanese and the German, but it was the politics in the various zones that were expected to be represented, that led to everybody getting frustrated. And I think the United Nations decided to let it be, for a while. But more to your, whether there are criteria, of course, there should be criteria for being a member of the Security Council. You must have the wherewithal, you must have the strength. You cannot go and put an insignificant country that is GDP is what, and the next day you say, look, the Security Council needs to support an operation. They can't do anything. So when you begin to look at it, that yes, there must be criteria for this, and as far as we are concerned and everybody is concerned, there's no way you can, think of an expanded Security Council without a country like Nigeria. And I keep saying sometimes that also should put a responsibility on us that we need to grow up fast in order to take our place in some of these, organizations, because it's very, very critical. And more specifically, when you look at the members of the Security Council today, they were, to start with, the powers that won the war a few years ago, after the end of the war. They constituted, so they created the organization the way they wanted it. Now the world has grown. The world has expanded. New actors have come into the, and there are new regional powers that you need to bring in order to complement this whole question of, shared responsibilities. And when you look at what we've done from our own perspective, look, we've been one of the strongest supporters and contributors to the UN peacekeeping operations. I can't remember how many peacekeeping we've done around the world. And there's no African country, if I remember correctly, that has done as much as we have done in terms of peacekeeping. So when we are talking of criteria, we are talking of the strength, we are talking of the capability and the capacity of each country to have the strength to speak and to take action with the rest of the world when it comes to, And this is what gives a country like America that confidence that a president of America can say anything to us anytime they feel like, because they know that when you talk of military power today, America remains the only single superpower. It has the best air force in the world, and its air force can fly to any part of the world, do whatever it can. You can't say that such a country shouldn't be in the United Nations, or the president shouldn't speak with so much confidence and arrogance and disdain for the rest of the world. So for me, there must be a criteria. Those with the capacity and the capability needs to be on the table. And if the round is started again that it needs to be reformed, I sincerely hope that the rest of the rest of us, Africa, has learned its lessons as to what went wrong the last time around, and a few other, regions would also be able to resolve their own internal problems so as to bring, so as to agree to the expansion of the Security Council. Now, if we do not resolve this crisis, and I would just say as a final contribution to this issue that, look, I think that if we are serious in getting the Security Council resolved, for me, the easiest way is that whenever we talk among ourselves in the continent at the regional level, continental level, we must come to a consensus and say, look, AB or ABC should be the countries we should recommend to the UN. If every other region does that, this thing will pass very easily. Okay.
Now, we have been discussing Nigeria at the 73rd UN General Assembly. We'll take a break now. When we come back, we'll delve into other areas that are of interest to Nigeria in the face of improving the UN National General Assembly.
Nigerians. Suicide bombers are not spirits. They are not ghosts. They are human beings like you and me. They live amongst us. They are your neighbors. They are your friends today, but terrorists tomorrow. So you must know your neighbor now. Security begins with you and me. Know your neighbor. Be vigilant. Be security conscious. Report suspicious persons, objects, and movements to the police and other security agencies. The security of our nation is a duty for you and me.
If you see something, say something. Nigeria, unite against terrorism.
This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
Move now! The red light won't kill you! Move now!
To dey disobey traffic law, they cause accidents. Me, I don't talk, say I no go dey do am again because change begins with me.
I will no longer endanger my life crossing the express. Instead, I will use the bridge because change begins with me.
Oga driver, stop this bus now, won't come down. I be one carry me past where they go.
Make I dey stop anyhow for road, they cause traffic wahala and accidents. So I go dey stop for the right bus stop because change begins with me.
Change begins with me.
This message is brought to you by the National Orientation Agency in conjunction with the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
President Muhammadu Buhari's speech to the 73rd General Assembly of the United Nations is our focus on Good Morning Nigeria, and we want to welcome to this discussion from our Maiduguri studio a former ambassador of Nigeria to Pakistan, Ambassador Dauda Danladi. Ambassador Danladi, you are welcome to Good Morning Nigeria.
Good morning, Nigeria, and good morning, Your Excellencies in the studio.
All right, we'll be coming to you in a short while. We'd like Nigerians to know that many are responding to this conversation because, of course, the importance of President Buhari's speech yesterday. We have some tweets here, and let's read it out before we continue our conversation. We have Delegate Solomon. Truly, there are always many political, security, social, economic, and other contentious issues of the international scene which affects Nigeria and Africa. But Mr. President and the government delegation are expected to pay more attention to issues that affect Nigeria more directly, like insecurity, poverty, etc.
And Mike Ayakos tweets, the president's address to the 73rd UN General Assembly is a welcome development. His speech really dealt on all aspects of human development. The world leaders should follow suit. We need global peace and collaboration among nations. There must be peaceful coexistence in the world in order to fight poverty.
Abubakar Ismail just asked a question. Is the UN taking action on the issues being raised annually?
Omogbolahon tweets, whoever listened to Mr. President's speech at the UN General Assembly cannot agree less that PMB was on spot. His speech was a summary of all that matters vis-a-vis our very existence as a race, people, and all you can think of.
All right, Omobolaho once again says Buhari has indeed spoken like a Pan-African statesman that he is, speaking for the interest of migrants across Europe and America. The collective well-being of African descent in Europe and America must be protected.
Akins Dada, tackling migration should begin by making Africa to become what foreign lands are. Africans are migrating from all ramifications.
Okay, Sani Michael or Makoji, to some of us, before we call for any alignment, we demand that the stolen Nigeria's funds that are domiciled in Europe should be repatriated unconditionally. Our stolen funds should not come back to us in Africa as aids or grants. Give us our stolen wealth now.
Osa Moses, a very good speech by our president. Migration is part of human life to look for greener pasture and improve the standard of living of individuals. Once Africa can improve the nation's economy and create more employment opportunities, it will reduce irregular migration. Those are the tweets we have, and we quickly go to Maiduguri to take on Ambassador Dauda Danladi's thoughts. Since we're just bringing you, let's allow you give a general comment on the speech of President Muhammadu Buhari.
The speech of President Muhammad Buhari is a milestone, considering Nigeria's contribution over the years since independence, since 1960, to UN peacekeeping operations. The call for the expansion of the United Nations Security Council, which is the principal organ of the UN, I think is timely. Nigeria, over the years, is ranked the 14th largest contributing nations in terms of troops to the restoration of peace in the world. In Africa, in just 2018, recently, according to the data released by the Department of Peacekeeping Operations, Nigeria is ranked the 8th largest country in contributing troops to peace operations. Now, going forward, when you look at the huge contributions that Nigeria has done to the restoration of peace in Liberia and Sierra Leone, in January this year, the new president of Liberia commended Nigeria and said that Liberians will forever remain grateful to Nigeria for the restoration of peace and the huge sacrifices made to restore peace in their country. We have witnessed a transition from civil to civil rule for the first time in decades in Liberia. Now, if you look at the various challenges of global threat in the world, look at the Syrian war. The Syrian war has been ongoing now for the past 7 years, and over 500,000 people have lost their lives in Syria. 11.7 million people are displaced. They have lost their homes, and 5.6 million refugees abound in the world. And you know the challenges refugees are facing in Europe. Now, if you look at Yemen, the 3 years war in Yemen, over 50,000 children have lost their lives, with about 3 million refugees. Now, another longest dispute, which requires serious attention, is the Kashmir dispute between Pakistan and India. It is the longest dispute in the world. The non-implementation of the UN resolution may not be as a result of the expansion of the Security Council to incorporate certain countries. In Africa, Nigeria being one, and perhaps in Central Asia, there will be the need for countries like India to participate in the Security Council. Over 90,000 people have lost their lives in the Kashmir dispute, and it is still counting. Now, the Israeli-Palestinian crisis, again, since the crisis started in 1920, over 26,000 people have lost their lives, with 11,000 people receiving various treatment. Now, the pursuit of global peace, yes, the United Nations has made some effort, and we can see some results. The historic summit of President Trump and Kim Jong-un, the engagement now between South Korea and North Korea are all in the right direction towards perhaps the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. But Africa alone, through various religious conflicts, ethnic conflicts, insurgency and terrorism, in just 2017, over 35,000 people have lost their lives, with over 60,000 people, especially in Nigeria, that are internally displaced. So the speech of the president actually captures the true picture of Nigeria and the role that the global community should play in ensuring that the world achieves sustainable global peace. And on the other hand, yes, there must be bilateral and multilateral cooperations, especially in the fight against corruption. Nigeria over the years has been battling with the issue of repatriation of funds. And one wonders when poverty, hunger have ravaged most African nations. But on the other hand, we are yet to see real commitment in ensuring that illicit funds stashed in Europe are repatriated back to Nigeria. And I think what the president has said is a wake-up call in his speech for the for the United Nations to intensify efforts towards ensuring that, yes, funds illegally stashed in European countries are repatriated back to Nigeria. Yes, we know that the UN has been contributing its quota to the African development. Africa enjoys about 36% of the expanded system funding of the UN through allocation to various organizations like IFAD, the Food Agricultural Organization that is trying to improve and modernize agriculture in Africa. Of course, narrowing it down to Nigeria. Recently, a report was released that the UN has contributed over 4 billion naira for assistance to internally displaced persons in Borno State, where 60,000.
Ambassador Danladi, we are going to pause you here for a while, but I think it's also important for us to ask you the next question, because I know you just joined us. Let's ask you the following next question that will take us away from the analysis we have already posited. Now, let's look at the outcomes of this UN General Assembly that President Buhari made a speech on yesterday. Considering all he presented to the world, what would you think are going to be the outcomes of this year's General Assembly?
We will see greater cooperation both at the bilateral and multilateral levels towards the resolution of conflicts in Africa, especially the fight against terrorism and insurgency. Again, I'm optimistic that we will see greater cooperation in the area of fight against corruption, the need to repatriate illegal funds, especially Nigeria's quest to ensure that funds that have been discovered, the normal judicial process are fast-tracked by various countries where these funds are stashed so that Nigeria can benefit. Again, there would be positive outcome in terms of more funding for various developmental projects in Africa. So going forward, there is hope that by the end of the 73rd UN General Assembly, there could be various programs that would be put in place by the UN towards addressing some of the challenges facing not only Nigeria, but Africa. But importantly, I do hope that his speech will stimulate the need to expand the UN Security Council, both the permanent and, of course, the temporary. We are all aware that Nigeria, of course, recently just concluded 2 terms as a temporary member of the UN Security Council, but that's not enough, looking at the various conflicts that Africa is facing, both in terms of the ethnic and religious crisis, and as well as the combating of terrorism. So,
Ambassador Dauda Danladi, now we're doing the home stretch. Ambassador Joe Keshi, it was you who posited at the beginning of this program that at the end of it all, we must look inwards. How, as your final thoughts as to how we move forward, how do you think this will play out? Because conflicts start from inside each country. So when we make political decisions, economic decisions, corruption, how would looking inward eventually help us launch into the international scene?
We need to begin by looking seriously at a leadership recruitment process. That is one. My colleague here, in one of his contributions, taught or said actually that corruption is the bane of this country, and I disagree. Leadership is the bane of this country. Corruption is just a symptom of the failure of leadership. If we get our leadership right, if we get a leader who can take this country, I like to use the phrase, beyond the finishing line. We have the capacity and the capability to speak with confidence, with authority, and actually to be one of the countries helping others, particularly on the West African, on the West African sub-region and the African continent. Because at the end of it all, we have all what it takes. Whether it's the human capital, we do have. Whether our land, when you talk of the resources in this country, they are available. So what is just lacking is that leadership with a vision to unify this country, with a vision to seriously diversify the economy of this country, creates very strong institutions, not strong leaders. And once we begin to do things like that, I can tell you that this country will be one of the most powerful countries in the continent of this region. And when we speak from that position of strength, I believe that the world will certainly listen. So for me, let's get our leadership issues right, not just, and when I talk of leadership, I'm not just talking at the political level alone. All is becoming actually necessary to get it at all levels, including the churches as well, or including religious bodies.
All right,
So that's where I end my contribution.
Leadership, well, that has always been the bane, according to some experts like Ambassador Kesha, and that may also brings us to the issue of behavioral theory of the political science, that of course says that a country is run based on the behavioral pattern of the leaders that the country produces.
Absolutely.
All right,
Absolutely.
and let me turn to Ambassador Strakina very briefly. One of the points that President Buhari raised yesterday had to do with the legacy bequeathed by the late Nelson Mandela of South Africa. What is the message there?
Well, that speech was delivered at the establishment or commencement of the 10-year peace, anniversary. The peace you know, this thing of that was established, you know, by the UN for the next 10 years. And I think the central message of Mr. President is that you cannot have peace when the preference is readily for people to go into conflict mode rather than to sit down to negotiate. And also, Mr. President centrally located the role of women, you know, in society to obtain peace. The gender issue he highlighted surprised many people, you know, thinking that he would not say anything like that. But he said it, that the role of women in conflict prevention and sustaining peace is very fundamental. But the most important issue as Africans is the issue of racism, racial discrimination, and xenophobia. That is driving a lot of things in the world today. Even if you look, listen to the undertones in the debates on migration or so-called illegal migration, racism is there, very palpable below the surface. The issue of human rights, that we are always, people are putting the spotlight on us to check us whether we are doing rightly by human rights or not. There is racism in it. When you go to those countries, you'll find that racism actually pulsates below the surface. It never comes out to the surface until a critical moments. So Nigeria, as the biggest black nation, must put racism and racial discrimination at the forefront of the discourse in the United Nations. Now, coming to the issue of, very briefly, the reform of the Security Council, it encompasses more than expansion of the membership. It involves, first, the framework and working method of the Security Council. It encompasses the relationship between the Security Council and other organs of the United Nations, particularly the General Assembly, the Human Rights Council, the Peace Building Commission, and things like that. And thirdly, the use of the veto power. How should it be used? Should it be used sparingly, only where egregious human rights violations are taking place or so,
all right,
before the issue of expansion comes in?
All right, thank you, because at the Security Council, if one nation vetoes a resolution, it stops there.
That's
all right.
one of the problems, yes.
All right, gentlemen, it's been a very healthy conversation on Nigeria's participation as the 73rd United Nations General Assembly taking place in New York. Our president was there the 20th to deliver his presentation. You know. All right, and at this point, we are closing down this segment of the program, and we wish to appreciate those who actually did justice to the topic. I'd like to begin with Ambassador Usman Saruki, former Deputy Permanent Representative of Nigeria to the United Nations. Ambassador Usman Saruki, thank you for your contribution this morning.
Thank you for having me here.
All right, Ambassador Joe Keshi, of course, was the permanent Secretary, Minister of Foreign Affairs in the, perhaps in the last dispensation. Thank you, sir, for being part of the program this morning.
Thank you for having me.
All right, and from Maiduguri, Ambassador Dauda Danladi, thank you. You joined us a bit late, but you made a very useful contribution this morning. Thank you indeed. And Dr. Joseph Bularinwa from Lagos Network Center, it's been nice talking to you this morning on Good Morning Nigeria. And finally, Femi Adesina joined us from New York. We got a little bit of his take on the issues raised, but we had issues with his line in the course of the conversation. Thank you also for reaching us from New York. And to continue our program, let's take you on weather. That's, of course, knowing weather prospects for the rest of today.
Hello and welcome to the weather forecast. A quick check on what we expect. Morning thunderstorms and rainfall activities are probable, especially over the southern cities. Cities like Lagos and part of Calabar and their environ should expect some thunderstorms and rainfall activities. Makurdi, Jalingo axis too are not left out, with some weather in the morning. While Kebbi and their environ should also expect some overnight weather systems. Other places should be cloudy. Later in the evening, we anticipate some thunderstorms to prevail over the extreme northern part of the country. Also, the north central, especially the high grounds, are expected to witness some thunderstorms here and there. The southern cities should also expect some activities in the evening hours. I leave you with temperature forecast. Thank you for staying tuned. I am Oluchukwu Anoku. Bye for now.
And that's our show this morning. We thank you for being part of it. Tomorrow is yet another day when we will return here with a fresh edition of Good Morning Nigeria. My name is Kirian Umayo. Have a great day.
And I'm Femi Okeowo. Enjoy the rest of your day.